April 1945, Bavaria. The air smelled wrong. Not just of smokier diesel fuel, not just of the burnt wood from the half-collapsed houses that lined the narrow village road. It was something else, something older. The smell of fear that had baked into the soil itself. The 12th Armored Division, the Hellcats, had rolled into this nameless Bavarian village 3 hours before dawn. Their tank treads carved deep scars into the mud-soaked road. Sergeant Bill Rohr stood outside his jeep, watching the sun crawl over the ridge, painting the ruins in shades of rust and ash. He was 28 years old, a mechanic from Kansas City, before Uncle Sam handed him a rifle and told him to fix the world. He'd seen men die. He'd seen cities burn. He'd seen things she'd never speak of again. But he hadn't seen this yet. Behind a crude, fence-off barbed wire and wooden stakes, 23 young women huddled together under a faded Red Cross banner. Their clothes were mismatched, torn military jackets over civilian dresses, boots 3 sizes too big, scarves wrapped around their heads like makeshift armor against the cold. Their eyes told the real story. Hollow, empty, the kind of eyes that had stopped expecting mercy. Word had spread fast among the GIs, faster than orders, faster than common sense. They're comfort girls, someone whispered near the mess tent. Captured with the SS, another said. German Apravate muttered, spitting into the dirt. Rohr didn't react. He'd learned long ago that war turned men into storytellers, and storytellers rarely cared about the truth. If you're watching this and you believe that courage still matters, that history's quietest moments deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button right now. Then drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Are you in Texas, London, Manila? I read every single one. Let's honor these untold stories together. The commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, called Rohr over. His face waist-tight, tired. The kind of tired that came from making decisions no textbook had prepared him for. Rohr, you're on guard duty. Those women, we don't know what they are yet. Prisoners, victims, collaborators. Hell, maybe all 3. Just keep them contained until we figure it out. Rohr nodded. Yes, sir, Dodden Rohr. Reynolds paused, his hand resting on the Jeep's hood. Keep it clean. No incidents. We're liberators, not conquerors. Remember that. Understood, sir. But as Rohr walked toward the barbed wire fence, he wondered if the women inside that tent knew the difference. The interpreter was Corporal Jack Hines, 22 years old, born to German immigrant parents in Ohio. He spoke the language like a native, but his accent had faded years ago, scrubbed clean by American schoolyards and baseball games. Jack stood beside Rohr as they approached Thetant. The wind pulled at the canvas, making it snap like a broken sail. You ready for this? Rohr asked. Jack swallowed hard. I've translated to Ronagansh, supply orders, surrender documents, but this I don't even know what to call them. People, Rohr said quietly. Start there. They stepped inside. The silence was immediate, oppressive. 23 pairs of eyes locked onto them. Some of the women sat on wooden crates. Others stood pressed against the back wall, arms crossed over their chests. A few were crying silently, their faces with dirt and tears. And then one woman stepped forward, blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes that burned with something between defiance and terror. Her voice cracked as she shouted in broken English. We won't take our clothes off. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Rohr froze. Jack's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The other women began to murmur, clutching each other. One collapsed to her knees, sobbing. We raised his hands slowly, palms out. Nobody's asking you to. But the blonde woman, her name was Greta, he'd learned later, didn't believe him. Why would she? Men in uniforms had been asking her to do unspeakable things for months. Why would these men be different? She backed up, Trembling, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles went white. "We won't," she screamed again. You cannot make us." Rear's jaw tightened. He turned to the guards standing behind him. "Everyone out now, Sarge. We're supposed to out." The guards hesitated, then filed through the tent flap one by one. Only Jack remained. Roar pulled a crate over and sat down slowly, deliberately making himself smaller, less threatening. He gestured for Jack to kneel beside him. "Tell her," Roar said softly, "that no one here is going to hurt her. Tell her we're not the SS. Tell her she's safe now." Jack translated, his voice shaking. Greta stared at them. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Then slowly she sank onto a crate across from them. "You lie?" she whispered in German. Jack shook his head. "No, he's telling the truth. Men always lie." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind rattled the tent poles. Somewhere outside, a truck engine rumbled to life. Then Greta began to talk. Her story came in fragments, broken sentences, long pauses where words failed, and only tears filled the silence. She and the others had been taken 6 months earlier. Some from their homes, some from hospitals where they worked as nurses, some from streets. The SS had called it volunteer service. But there were no volunteers, only orders, only threats. They were moved from camp to camp, following retreating German officers, entertaining them, the officer said, keeping morale high. But when the Allies closed in, the same officers who had called them angels of comfort began calling them traitors, collaborators, and when the Americans arrived, the SS abandoned them, left them behind like broken equipment. "They told us," Greta said, her voice barely a whisper, "that the Americans would do worse, that you would use us and then shoot us." Roar felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not pity, something heavier, responsibility. He stood up slowly. Jack followed. "Tell her," Roar said, "that I'm going to get him food, blankets, and a medic. And tell her that no one is going to lay a hand on them without their permission." Jack translated. Greta's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Why?" she asked in English. "Why you help?" Roar looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the only thing that felt true. "Because it's the right thing to do." But here's the what nobody saw coming. Not even Sergeant Roar himself, because the truth about who these women really were, it was still buried in a stack of documents in an SS office 2 miles away. And when those papers were finally found, everything would change. That afternoon, Roar returned to the tent. This time, he brought 2 medics. Private Monroe, a soft-spoken farm boy from Georgia, and Corporal Davis, a former veterinarian who'd learned battlefield medicine the hard way. The women flinched when the men entered. Greta stood immediately, positioning herself between the medics and the others. Her body language screamed one word: "No." "Tell them," Roar said to Jack, "that the medics need to check for injuries, disease, malnutrition." But he paused, looking directly at Greta. "They stay fully clothed. We'll work around it." Jack translated. Thetan went silent. One of the medics, Monroe, looked confused. "Sarge, how are supposed to check for?" "You'll figure it out," Roar said coldly. "Treat them like human beings first, patients second." Davis nodded slowly. "Understood, sir." For the next hour, the medics moved through the tent with careful, deliberate movements. They checked pulses through sleeves, wrapped bandages over torn fabric, offered aspirin and clean water. They didn't demand. They asked, "May I check your arm? Can you lift your sleeve just a little? Does this hurt?" At first, the women were rigid, silent, waiting for the moment the kidneys would crack and reveal the cruelty underneath, but it never came. Monroe knelt beside a young woman, barely 18, who had a deep gash on her shin. He cleaned it gently, his hands steady, his voice calm. "You're going to okay," he said, even though she didn't understand English. "You're Safino." When the medics finally left, they took nothing. Not dignity, not hope, not rest. They left behind something instead. Blankets, coffee, and tin cups, a small stack of sea rations, and tucked into the corner, 3 chocolate bars. One of the younger women picked up a chocolate bar like it was a religious artifact. She broke off a piece, tasted it, and started crying. Greta sat on her crate, staring at the items as if they might vanish at any moment. Jack stood near the entrance, watching her. "You still think we're lying?" Greta didn't answer, but her hands stopped shaking. That night, Roar couldn't sleep. He sat outside his tent, smoking a cigarette hadn't really want, staring at the stars that had watched this war from a safe distance. Captain Reynolds found him there. "How'd it go?" The captain asked, lighting his own cigarette. "They're terrified," Roar said. "Not of us, exactly. Of what they think we're going to do." Reynolds exhaled smoke into the cold air. "They say what happened to them got enough." Roar flicked ash into the dirt. "Enough to know they're victims, not collaborators." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Headquarters wants a full report beat tomorrow. Names, backgrounds, identities verified. They're worried about spies." "Spies?" Roar's voice went sharp. "Sir, those women are barely holding themselves together. They're not enemy agents. They're I know." Reynolds cut him off. "But until we can prove it, they're classified as Ps. That means they stay in custody." Roar crushed his cigarette under his boot. "For how long?" Reynolds looked away. "However long it takes." The next morning, Roar made a decision that had nothing to do with orders. He found a bombed-out workshop on the edge of the village. The roof was half collapsed.
The walls scorched black, but in the corner, covered in dust and debris, was a sewing machine. It was an old Singer heavy iron, the kind that could survive a war. Roar hauled it onto the back of a jeep and drove it to the tent. When he carried it inside, the women stared like he'd brought them a piece of the moon. "It works," Roar said through Jack. "I checked. If you want to mend your clothes or make new ones, you can." Greta stood slowly. She walked over to the machine, running her fingers along the metal frame, her eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Because," Roar said, "you deserve to feel like people again." Over the next 3 days, something extraordinary happened. The women began to sew, not just for themselves. They mended torn American uniforms. They stitched patches onto jackets. They took leftover parachute silk, cream cold, strong, beautiful, and turned it into dresses. Greta worked the longest hours. Her hands moved with precision, muscle, memory from a life before the war, before the camps, before the fear. She made herself a white dress, simple, clean, the kind a woman might wear to church on a Sunday morning. When she finished, she held it up to the light. The fabric glowed. Jack was there, bringing more thread. He saw the dress and smiled. "It's beautiful." Greta looked at him, her voice steady for the first time since they'd met. "If I wear this when I leave here, it will mean I am clean again." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. But the storm was already building. 2 days later, a convoy arrived from headquarters. Military police officers impressed. Uniforms who had never slept in a foxhole or dug a grave with their bare hands. And with them came a visiting Colonel Whitaker, thin, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who saw the world in clear categories: ally, enemy, threat. He demanded to inspect the prisoners. Roar stood outside the tent as Whitaker strode inside, Jack translating at his side. The women froze. Whitaker looked at them with the expression of a man examining livestock. "These are the comfort girls." "They're victims, sir," Roar said carefully. Whitaker didn't look at him. "Until we verify their identities, they're enemy personnel." "Understood, sir," with respect. "Understood, Sergeant." Roar's jaw clenched. Yes, sir. Whitaker turned to the MPs. Prepare them for transfer. They'll be moved to a holding facility until no. The shout came from Greta. She stood in the center of the tent, her white dress clutched in her hands, her eyes burning. No more camps, she said in broken English. No more cages. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. Sergeant, control. You're prisoners. But Roar didn't move because in that moment he realized something that would change the course of the next 72 hours. He wasn't going to let them take these women. Not to another camp. Not to another cage. Not to disappear into the bureaucratic fog of post-war Europe where people vanished and were never heard from again. Jack saw it in his face. Sarge, what are you thinking? Roar's voice was quiet, steady, dangerous. I'm thinking, he said, that some orders aren't meant to be followed. And that's when everything changed because 2 miles away in an abandoned SS office, an American intelligence officer was about to open a filing cabinet. And inside that cabinet were documents that would shatter every assumption anyone had made about these 23 women. The truth was about to explode, and Sergeant Bill Roar, he was about to make the most dangerous decision of his life. The intelligence officer's name was Lieutenant Morris Kaufman, Brooklyn-born, Jewish, 24 years old, with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers from cataloging enemy documents for 6 straight months. He'd seen Nazi records before, deportation lists, execution orders. The cold arithmetic of genocide written in neat German typescript, but the files he found in the abandoned SS office 2 miles from the village made his hands shake. He opened the filing cabinet at 0800 hours on April 22nd. By 8:15 he was running to find Captain Reynolds. Back at the village, Roar sat in the mess tent with Jack, drinking coffee that tasted like burned dirt. The MPs had been ordered to wait 24 hours before the transfer. Something about paperwork delays. Bureaucracy moving at the speed of exhausted armies, but Roar knew it was borrowed time. You're really going to do this? Jack asked quietly. Do what? Don't play dumb, Sarge. I've seen that look before. You're planning something. Roar didn't answer. He just stared into his coffee cup like it held answers. The truth was he didn't have a plan. Not yet. He just had a certainty, a bone-deep knowledge that if those women got loaded onto trucks tomorrow morning, he'd never forgive himself. Jack, he said finally, you ever do something you knew was wrong by the book, but right by everything else? Jack leaned back. My whole family's German, Sarge. I spent 2 years getting spat on in school before Pearl Harbor. Then I put on this uniform and suddenly I'm the good German, the useful one. He paused. Yeah, I know what it's like when the book doesn't make sense anymore. Roar nodded slowly. Then the tent flap burst open. Lieutenant Kaufman stood there breathing hard, holding a folder stuffed with papers. Captain Reynolds was right behind him, his face pale. Roar, Reynolds said. We need to talk now. They spread the documents across a wooden table in the command tent. Kaufman's hands trembled as he translated, his voice low and urgent. These aren't German comfort girls, he said. At least half of them aren't. Roar leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean, they were taken, kidnapped. The SS kept detailed records because they were paranoid about partisan infiltration. Kaufman pulled out a page covered in stamps and signatures. Look, Greta Wolf, age 26, Polish national, nurse, arrested in Warsaw after treating resistance. Fighters, sentenced to re-education labor. That's SS code for slavery. Reynolds finished quietly. Kaufman nodded. He flipped through more pages. Elise Morrow, French, taken from Lyon after her brother was caught smuggling. Allied pilots. Marie Kowalski, Czech. Her entire family was executed. She was spared because an officer wanted he couldn't finish the sentence. The tent went silent. Roar felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Not surprise. Confirmation. How many? He asked. At least 13 of the 23. Kaufman pushed his glasses up. The others are German, but their stories aren't much better. Forced recruitment, threats against their families. One was a university student who refused to join the BDM. Another was a cabaret singer who insulted gerbils in a show. Reynolds sat down hard on a crate. So they're not enemy combatants. They're not even collaborators, Kaufman said. They're victims, prisoners. The SS classified them as entertainment assets. Moved them from base to base like furniture. Rohr's jaw clenched so tight he thought his teeth might crack. Does headquarters know? He asked. Reynolds shook his head. Kaufman just brought this to me. I'm sending the report up the chain right now. This changes everything. These women are displaced persons, victims of war crimes. They should be. The tent flap opened again. Colonel Whitaker stepped inside. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Gentlemen, Whitaker said coldly, I've been informed there's been a development regarding the prisoners. Reynolds stood quickly. Sir, we've just discovered. I've read the preliminary summary. Whitaker cut him off, and I'm ordering an immediate security review until we can verify every identity. Confirm they're not sleeper agents or infiltrators. They remain in custody. Sir, Rohr said, his voice tight. With respect, these women aren't spies. They're victims. Whitaker turned to him slowly. Sergeant, are you in